Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We're at episode 469. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today, Stephen Phillips from Sumo Logic in the studio. Welcome
Hello,
back, Stephen.
Paul. Thank you.
How are you?
It's great to be here.
Great to have you here. Now, there's quite a bit going on locally in New Zealand this week. I was looking through the bits and pieces of topics, and it's not all about what's happening on the other side of the world. It's mostly about what's happening here this week, which is good. Now, first up, we've had a little bit of a change in the world of e-scooters around particularly in Auckland has been the most recent announcement, which is that the Lime scooters that have really filled up our streets in Auckland for well over a year now are basically gone. They've been told to collect them up, clear out, and they've been somewhat politely booted out.
Yeah, and I think it's probably about time. I think New Zealand has taken a very different approach to what they've done in London. London wanted to get the infrastructure right before they introduced scooters in, whereas New Zealand's thought, she'll be right. Let's just try this out and see what happens. And we can see what happens. People get hurt. And now it's time, I suppose, for the next sort of vendor to come and try their wares.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from the safety perspective, I think we heard figures of $4 million in terms of costs that have been borne or in that sort of direction by the Accident Compensation Corporation, which fronts up and pays for people's medical care and varying other related costs. Now, it's a little bit hard to know. Some of those people may be no longer riding a bicycle, they're riding an e-scooter. Would they have had an accident? But it seems to me probably more likely to have accidents on e-scooters than walking or riding a bicycle. And there's the aspect of with a bicycle, the very, very large majority of people wear a helmet. And with an e-scooter, if you own an e-scooter, there's probably a reasonable chance you're going to also wear a helmet, certainly a little bit more so than if you're just jumping on one that's on the street that doesn't have a helmet with it, but you're also ticking a part of the app as it was with Lime that says that you will wear a helmet, which just seemed to be a bit farcical to me that you would be forced to agree to something that there's no way that you could possibly comply with unless you were carrying a helmet around and with you, which I'm not sure what percentage of the population does that. Stephen, do you carry a helmet with you around the city at all?
Certainly I don't. No,
that's not normal. I mean, Look, if you're out and I know you do a bit of biking and mountain biking and the like, that sort of situation you're geared up for it, but. This sort of scenario when you're likely to come across a Lime scooter, that's not probably the norm. So.
Yeah, I think you can never have too much in the way of protective equipment to try and keep yourself safe. So
yeah. But there's another angle. I saw some commentary indicating, hey, this doesn't set a good precedent in terms of us dealing with international firms or even local firms sort of having confidence in councils when the playing field is moving. And I get that there needs to be some caution, but this very much right from the beginning was trial, 3-month trial, extended, and so on. And obviously it's a pretty interesting space because you've got about at least five or 6 vendors involved in the market in New Zealand, Flamingo and whatnot, and Uber in there under in a couple of different ways in terms of the companies that they back. So I guess I'm not so concerned about that aspect, but it's probably more the safety aspect that's concerned me. And then being a taxpayer, knowing that actually what these e-scooter companies have been, paying back doesn't necessarily line up at all with what the cost is of the accidents, let alone the impact that has on those individual people's lives and on the economy when you've got people that aren't able to work because they're stuck in hospital and the like. So I'm not quite sure we've got it right, but I do think we should be experimenting with new technologies and working out how the stuff looks. I think I said maybe a year or even 2 years ago that I'm not sure we've reached kind of the end game with these e-scooters. I think there'll be some other tech coming, and there was news this week of a more not what we would call the e-scooter, more a moped maybe might be the term for some what look like 50cc little moped scooter type things in India, and there's a startup there called Bounce in Bangalore, and they've got 17,000 of these both electric and gasoline scooters, mopeds, whatever you want to call them, and they've I think just recently raised 150 million US in additional funding. So do you think that could be the next wave for New Zealand? I mean, they're parking-wise, they're very different. You can't just scatter the footpaths with them, but I imagine you've got bigger batteries, and they're more geared up for sort of longer journeys where you could ride one of those instead of other modes of transport.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issues that they're facing at the moment is the scooters people are coming off basically with the wheels sort of sliding out when it's wet and things like that. You're not going to have maybe quite so many of those sort of things because some people that'll take these will be more familiar with that. But the mopeds will have the ability to actually use the cycle lanes, whereas the scooters don't at the moment. So we haven't thought through what are the corridors that these different vehicles and all use at the moment.
Well, the scooters are quite broadly used on the cycle lanes, and we would have some debate certainly amongst our team here if we delved into that. I think depending on whether somebody rides or owns a bicycle or an e-scooter in terms of where they think it's appropriate to ride it. I mean, I would think these sort of scooter moped things that they're talking about in India, basically the equivalent of 50cc type motorbikes, but they've got some that are, and some that are electric based. I mean, those look very much geared up for the road rather than even potentially some of the cycle areas. So look, I'm not willing to put a bet on where our transport will be 10 or 20 years out, but I think there's still a lot of experimentation,
absolutely,
and a lot of changes ahead, and certainly the autonomous piece in the puzzle as that lands, that will change things, and as we maybe join up some dots in other ways, it's all going to shape what the future looks like.
Do you think the next batch of scooter vendors in New Zealand are going to have the controls in there too? Will we see helmets being mandatory or provided? Will we see controls to stop people that are maybe a little bit inebriated jumping on a scooter? Because apparently that's actually where a lot of the accidents have occurred. People out for a drink and then decide it's a great idea to use a scooter and they forget about the helmet completely.
Yeah, it's a good point actually, because I think if you look at the data, and I haven't seen it, there must be a lot that you can tell from that, and I think in some cases there've already been some agreement to curfews and the like, which ties into that, and maybe that's unfair on those people who haven't been drinking, that there's now a curfew in place and you can't you can't use an e-scooter because some other people at that time of night use them inappropriately. So there's a way in which data can get used against some people, probably unfairly. That's I guess always going to be the case. Yes, I think it's going to be curious how all that lands. But I think the regulators and it seems to be council who are making most of the decisions at the moment. They can move a bit quicker than central government in a lot of cases. It's in their hands, and so they would have that choice of saying that you have to wear helmets, but maybe they don't want to look that they're spoiling people's fun, and it doesn't come out of their pockets if people have accidents. So the flow on it's impacting. I guess if you had to look for who's being impacted financially, that's the ACC, Accident Compensation Corporation. So whereas they don't have any so much of a role here. So interesting times. I certainly hope that whatever changes they have put in place, that we see a big drop in the accidents anyway. And if it's all down to drunk riding, then a chunk of that can certainly be addressed by limiting the times in which people can ride, rightly or wrongly. So,
or a breathalyzer to turn it on.
Yes, well, you could do that. I think there are probably ways of working around that stuff too. But there you go.
Yeah, get your mate to do it for you.
Yeah. GST.
I'm glad I've got my Christmas online shopping done already.
We talked about these things over quite a long period, quite a number of years, and finally we've reached that point where most things that you buy online, even very small dollar values, it doesn't matter. They're going to be they are now being taxed, so GST's going on top. And look, the technological challenges in terms of how you do this, but the government approach of really hitting organisations who are selling more than $60,000 or companies that are selling more than $60,000 a year into the New Zealand market, being somewhat forced to comply with collecting GST. And
I'm just wondering how they're going to actually do that with local entities who set up a shop. You stop them one week and they could be back basically on a different domain the next week.
That's right. It's I guess by setting it at that sort of figure, they've decided that that's what sort of is likely to work. And you can't make every single scenario work, but I guess if you've got a business that's doing that much in New Zealand, then they might well be doing much more in other markets, and very hard for them to maybe dodge it. But there will be some cases, possibly where they manage to dodge it. But on the plus side, if you're doing those transactions that are over 400 New Zealand dollars, between 400 and 1,000, in the past, those used to be, that could be quite painful. You bought $600 worth of whatever it is from overseas, and then it would get held up at the border. Yep. You were having to pay GST plus some sort of customs clearance
and
type
handling fee.
And handling type fee. So what should have maybe been $100 GST on an item, you might have ended up paying closer to $200 by the time those other costs. So now you've got, for those anything under 1,000, that goes away, and it's just the GST. So there is a little bit of a silver lining in here, isn't there?
I'm hoping so, because I've had one set of goods, protective clothing to actually stop accidents happening. That it adds about an extra week and a bit basically to the delivery. You have to manually sort of provide all of the invoices back to the vendors, and then they invoice you, and then you pay them, and then they get the broker or the clearance person to send it to you. So it's a very convoluted process at the moment. So it'd be great for that to go away.
Yeah, I think it's good, and so hopefully that all is smooth. And from the perspective of, look, I mean, I've certainly benefited from buying little gadgets and cables and all sorts of little things, mounting brackets for GoPros and whatnot. I mean, all manner of things really online, and I certainly benefited. But I mean, 15%. I think it's better that we have a level playing field for our New Zealand retailers versus those that are
absolutely
in other locations. Not that it necessarily is a level playing field, because there's scale and there's all sorts of things, and entities that are shipping from China to New Zealand have a crazy unfair advantage that their shipping costs from China to New Zealand are less than what it costs to send a letter from one suburb in Christchurch to another suburb in Christchurch, or from anywhere in the country like that. You pick any town or city, and the international setups for shipping are kind of nuts if it can go and fit within what can be carried by the postal service. And I think there's been a little bit of coverage online around that, and it's not quite fair on local retailers. And hence why you see on Trade Me, I mean, most things have got a minimum $5 shipping on Trade Me, yet you can go online and buy something from from China or whatnot for you buy some little thing, it might be $1 and it's got free shipping on it. You're thinking, how does that happen? That's nuts. But there we are. That is New Zealand today. That's what some retailers face. Now, on to one thing that I was actually talking to somebody about this last week, and he was saying, Paul, why don't we have Apple Watches in New Zealand that connect to the mobile network like people do in every other country? And the following morning was an announcement from Spark and from Apple to say that Apple are launching the Apple Watch with cellular connectivity in New Zealand, and that arrives on the 13th of December. I think you can start placing pre-orders this week. So it's happening, and it will be, I think, quite nice if you're someone who has worn an Apple Watch in the past, but you're really keen for that capability of being able to maybe not have to carry a phone around, but still be able to get those critical communications or have communications. And for me, there's probably two scenarios. One was out exercising and so on. You don't want to be carrying extra gadgetry, and the other is maybe you want to be a bit more disconnected. You still want to be able to be reached, but you don't necessarily want to have a screen to look at, get a bit of time away from the smartphone. Nice. Then I think there's a good approach there. So just days away. Now you're not so much of an Apple user using the Samsung phone there.
Yep, I'm using the Note 10 Plus.
Yeah,
it's a great device. Even looking at using it basically as a desktop at home for just round the home type sort of things. So both my wife and I have got Samsung devices.
Yeah, well into the ecosystem. So, but look, I think we good, and of course, Samsung have got, they were in fact there first in the market with Spark supporting them with their eSIM capability. But really, the interesting thing with the Apple Watch and this eSIM support from Spark is that they've also enabled the one number capability. So that means you can get your text messages and your calls on your watch as though you had taken a SIM card out of your phone and plugged it into your watch, which of course is not possible because it uses an eSIM or an embedded SIM capability. So yeah, very nice. I think it was about $12 or $12.50 a month. I did read something suggesting maybe the first 3 months are free. The kicker for me is I'm going to be away when this launches, so the timing's not quite right for me to get hands-on with it when it arrives. So I was hoping to get hands-on that next week, but I fly to Singapore on Saturday, and we'll be out of the country when it lands. So I'll probably have to report back on that maybe January on experiences. But of course, travelling it triggered a thought for me. Well, what happens when you're overseas? What's the roaming look like, and what would that cost? Well, it doesn't roam. So you lose that cellular capability when you're travelling. So just something to be aware of. Probably not a major issue for a lot of people. You probably cope, but it's just that little tinge of disappointment for me. And but we'll see. I'm looking forward to trying it. Now, of course, to try it means that my primary connection needs to be with Spark. So
great idea.
I'm going to have to well, and this is why this is naturally why why they've pushed ahead to get it, because it helps them keep the particularly higher value customers, and also potentially win some customers off Vodafone who, like me, want to at least try it out, or they're very keen on it. And so I have a Spark connection and a Vodafone connection, but the primary one with my main number is going to have to be on Spark to try this out. So
bit of number porting going on there.
Yes. So I'm actually not looking forward to porting numbers, and I know the large majority of the time it goes fine, but there's that little bit of what if something doesn't. But I think people will probably still be able to track me down one way or another. So it's and in most cases, I think the networks are reasonably good at it these days. We've been doing it for quite a number of years here in New Zealand.
Indeed.
Yeah. Now on to other bits and pieces. We've got we talked a lot about sport streaming and rights and other bits and pieces this year, and the Tokyo Olympics next year. There's a bit of a deal's been struck between Sky and Television New Zealand, so there will be content to a degree accessible in both places, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of almost the opposite of what happened with the Rugby World Cup. So it's gone the other way.
TVNZ are winning in both cases, right?
Absolutely. So having good production quality is obviously very important. But,
So the story is that Sky is going to have the bulk of the content for their paying customers, and they're going to have it in HD across I think a dozen channels, and then across their streaming capability. TVNZ themselves will then have access to content for their news programs, and I think something like 12 hours of up to 12 hours of coverage each day. So so significant access to the Olympics, and I'm not sure the Olympics is maybe what it once was for Kiwi audiences. I mean, back in the day, decades ago, there wasn't. I mean, there was a time we only had one or maybe two stations, and so when the Olympics was on, you didn't really see much else. So of course it was given a huge amount of attention. But these days we've got so many different things that we can be watching and doing. It's nothing like that. So
So I think I'm going to have to actually get a Sky subscription now and keep my Spark one on hold for a little while. I don't, unless you've got too much money, you can't afford to get all of the subscriptions you want anymore.
Keep them all going. Yeah. Now, also, and we didn't get a chance to dive into this last week, we've now got to the end of the first stage, you could say the first decade of ultrafast broadband rollout in New Zealand. And so for those that remember, the government kicked this off 2009, that they kind of got the ball rolling, and they set up what was Crown Fibre Holdings initially. And then, more recent years became Crown Infrastructure Partners, who we of course had on the podcast, and they had their initial target of hitting, I think 75% of the population, reaching them with fibre or ultrafast broadband, as it's been referred to, but around now, if you're in that first stage, there's a very, very high chance that fibre is in your street and available to you. Now, there's of course, that was 75%, so there's another 25% of the population who are either in the queue, or in some cases have got it already, because the what's sometimes be referred to as UFB2, of course has been moving along at some pace. And then we've got other connectivity options like the rural broadband initiative that's been putting faster connectivity to those in rural locations. So you've got fibre to your home.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How long have you had that, Stephen?
About a year.
About a year, yeah.
Yeah, so it's it does change the way that you sort of work. But as soon as I saw them basically coming near the road with the digger, basically I got in there.
Yep.
So it was a very seamless process. It literally, I think from the time the guy turned up at the house to the time we had fibre working was 15-20 minutes, and it was done.
Wow.
We're able to use the existing ducting, and it was just really fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And I'm still on the gig plan, but you never quite get a gig. But
20% apparently of the market now are on this top plan, which is an indicator that we like good speeds.
Yeah, absolutely.
We probably don't need them most of the time, but it's nice to have them have that extra headroom there.
Yeah, my kids tell me it's due to the low latency is why you need the faster plan. Apparently, that's what they say.
Oh, well, you have to go with it. You can't not have the fastest. Yeah. I think there's a whole lot we could delve into on that, but I think we've talked a lot about ultra-fast broadband and our connectivity in New Zealand and the good state that it's in. So we probably won't spend too much time delving into it, but certainly in the next year it would be good to look a little bit more around what's next, and where we're going with 5G, which of course is an important part of our connectivity picture, and then how those gaps get filled in as well with satellite connections, and of course the government and Crown Infrastructure Partners have also been involving the wireless internet service providers, or WISPs for short, in the mix. So it's great to see that they've really looked across all the varying mechanisms, and we've seen, I think, some impressive results so far. Certainly, any time we look across the ditch in Australia, we can feel pretty pleased with how it's
always
how
makes
it's
you
gone
makes you feel good
so far. Yeah.
Makes you feel good.
Yeah. I shared. I was at an event at Parliament a couple of weeks ago now, or a week and a half or so ago, where the chorus were holding there to sort of celebrate the results, and the minister and a few other folks got up to talk, and I think there's certainly a feeling that the broad support for the initiative of getting ultra fast broadband out, and I guess, opposite to Australia, where each political party sort of tried to stir the pot and change things. The fact that we had that broad support right from the get-go has I think really benefited us as a country.
Well, significantly. I think we're probably one of the top 5 nations in the world in terms of connectivity now, and it's unlocking doors for our especially companies that are getting involved in tech export and that side of things. Absolutely.
Now, in the early days when it started rolling out, and I think on this show we've watched it pretty closely. In fact, I moved house to a location that could get access to fibre in the early days, and 2 of the internet service providers helped me get on board and test it out. 2 who are now partners of the show. I think Vodafone connected me to their trial, and one of Vocus Communications brands also linked me up. So I was probably one of the few homes in the country with 2 ultrafast broadband connections. There weren't too many people with fibre at that stage, but yeah, we're now at a point where I think it's over 60% uptake in many locations, which is a big change from those early days where people would have fibres available in the street, but who cares? I don't need it at the moment, and now we're the majority of people are switching across.
Yeah, the uptake of fibre has been certainly a lot faster than the uptake of DSL, even when people were getting off dial-up and the likes. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very pleasing, and I think it could have a very good flow on. All right, now what else have we got? Well, keeping on that front of connectivity, this has been the week for 5G in New Zealand. Not in a big way, though, I've got to say. In a little way. So Spark were first cab off the rank, and no doubt as partners for the NZ Tech podcast, they were listening in a couple of weeks ago to Tony Baird from Vodafone, talking about Vodafone being the first to launch 5G. And the cheeky chaps down at Spark decided, well, actually, no, we can win this one and get in first. So last week they launched their first public 5G service, being what's referred to as fixed wireless access. And this allows people to, in the areas of Westport, Clyde, Twizel, Tekapo and Hokitika, to get 5G, I guess primarily to their homes with a router that sits generally in the window and picks up a 5G signal and gives you nice fast internet in your home. So
it's probably a great thing. They might not be able to get the fibre there, so having 5G wireless is even better. Yeah.
Well, if that's the best option at the moment, then very interesting. And for those that followed on Twitter, there was a bit of a cheeky jab from Vodafone New Zealand CEO Jason Paris. Little bit of fun there. But I think, look, it's great that there's a bit of competition and that our big players in New Zealand are trying to both position themselves well in regards to 5G. Realistically, though, Vodafone are in the box seat here, and that they've got this 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, which Spark don't have access to until the next sort of spectrum auction comes up, which it could be a couple of years away before they get any of that spectrum. So yeah, it's all a bit of fun at the moment, and there's a level of marketing teams and PR type spin around this stuff, and that's, I guess, evidenced by the press release we saw today. Was it today or was it yesterday? I think for this week, which is Vodafone talking about 5G enabling Wellington airport. And I was, I saw the email press release through from them, and they'd said Vodafone had said they're launching 5G in New Zealand this month. So I thought, they're moving quickly. It's right at the beginning of the month, and away they go. But when I delved into the press announcement a little bit deeper, I don't know. I wasn't. It didn't seem quite. Quite as excited. So the headline, you can read this on Vodafone's website: Wellington Airport becomes New Zealand's first 5G connected airport, and they've basically offering. They've got one of these, what you would call the sort of fixed wireless access 5G access points, so the same as what Spark are offering into people's homes, or a similar type of device. And they're saying that they will. This is actually a free trial. It's going to last for a week, and will allow up to 5 users to connect to the 5G wireless device for 5 minutes at a time. Now, this is not using a 5G phone. It's just using that fixed access point, so you would be using Wi-Fi from your phone or your laptop to connect to the 5G access point. So I don't know. To me, it sounds a little bit like marketing spin, but I'm very pleased to see that we have 5G coming from Vodafone this month, and it will be available from a whole range of, well, not a huge range, but a number of smartphones in New Zealand, and presumably the fixed wireless access as well. Now, I don't know how slim that will be, but they've promised it this month, and things are stepping up. So it's kind of a little bit of fun at the moment to sit on the sidelines, isn't it, Stephen? To sort of watch how our biggest telcos sort of jousted out a little bit, but Spark can't do too much with the spectrum they have at the moment, to be fair.
I'll try it out tomorrow. I'm down at the Wellington airport tomorrow.
Okay.
Hopefully it's Wi-Fi 6 and I can get more than 200 megabits per second. We'll see how it goes.
Yep. All right. Well, look forward to hearing about that. So I don't want to make too much fun of people's of these, how the marketing happens, and look, I guess they want there to be noise. They want the country to get excited about the next wave of technology, and look, I'm all for that. But sometimes the write-ups, I guess, don't push my buttons quite right.
It's all very good. They're saving people's dogs.
They're what?
You seen the ad on TV where the vet surgeon saves the dog.
Yeah, don't get me started on that one, and whether that really needed 5G or not, or would happen over a fixed connection. Anyway, that's for another day. Now, another local story, unfortunately, is this police data leak. We're going through this process of the gun buyback following the Christchurch shootings, and this has actually been talked about a lot in the studio because the Podcast New Zealand studio gets rented by the ACT Party each week, and of course one of their things has been anti the gun buyback, and they're saying, hey, this is all too fast, we should slow down and get it right before doing it. Well, the police seem to be a little bit in the same boat with trying to get out of hot water for leaking the details of gun owners, and they had apparently outsourced this data collection and the database, and they've certainly apologised for what happened, but I saw that it was quoted that they were saying that they just had to move at such pace to facilitate this thing, and somewhat hence why they didn't get a chance to have a better process. But to me, it just seems incredibly poor that such important information is able just to be leaked, and that this sort of database could be incorrectly accessed. I mean, you can't get everything right, 100% of stuff right 100% of the time. But it just seems like an incredible shortcoming to leak such important information, and you give away a database of gun owners, and most of these people that are fronting up and admitting that they have these guns and are going through a buyback process are probably fairly law-abiding people.
Yeah.
But then there's a database that could sort of get into the wrong hands, and those folks could know where to go and steal guns from, and so on. So
it's
not good.
Certainly not a good outcome.
Well, I mean, there has been an indication. I've seen. I think there's been one suggestion of this getting into a bunch of people's hands. Then the police were saying, well, only one dealer has logged in since they apparently made this faux pas and started providing access incorrectly to this data, and that dealer reported it to them. So I hope that that's the case, that it hasn't got out there and it's just an embarrassment, but in actual fact no one's got the data. Not sure I would be so confident based on there being some suggestions otherwise.
Yeah. Certainly, it needs to be taken very, very serious. This, and an organisation such as the New Zealand Police can't opt out of following best practices, regardless of whether they actually outsourced it or not. That should have been in the scope of what they were doing. If somebody makes change to a system, they should be doing security testing to make sure that the scope of access hasn't changed between versions or updates. So. You can't blame it on the vendor. You possibly can't blame it on the service provider who's doing the configuration of the vendor's technology. It comes down to process and policy wasn't followed, and that's really where things have gone wrong, I think.
Yeah, and it's shocking that this sort of stuff keeps happening. Now, I'm keen to hear a little bit from you around what's happening in the world of Sumo Logic. Maybe you can just remind listeners where Sumo Logic sort of fits in into this tech world, because we had your co-founder and CEO Christian Bedkin on the New Zealand Tech podcast earlier on this year.
Yes,
and gained some good insights then, but not everyone will have heard that or quite remembered all the dots. I know for me, I think I had to come across you a number of times before I started figuring out who you were exactly. But some of the technology that you offer fits into these sort of scenarios where privacy and security of data is really important. So I think it's probably good timing that you're in here on the show this week.
Yeah, so Sumo Logic is a cloud-based analytics company. So we look at all of the data that machines create, whether that's how people are using various sort of cloud-based systems or web-based systems. We work with companies like Samsung with Internet of Things. So when they push out a new device. We give them insights into how their devices adoption is happening, how it's being used, which features are being used. When they bring out the smartwatch Active 2 and all those types of things, they want to know which features are being used. So we give them insights into what's happening there. But we can also use that data to look at other things. So we can investigate and detect when there are risks. So, for instance, if we go back to the police case, if the police were making if there was being an update to the system, they should have been able to detect by doing security testing ahead of the release whether the regression testing had found that there was some changes in the way that the application can be used from version to version. So we can do things like detect those types of things that are very quickly. Usually that used to be a process that would take months, if not years, to put in place like an operations centre to have those types of controls. So the old school on-premise type approaches for that were a couple of years to do that. We're working with organisations like Pokemon. So Pokemon, who run the Pokemon Go platform, they do plushy toys, all of those types of things.
Yeah.
They're dealing with some really, really important privacy information. This is the privacy of the location of where your children are and where they might be at the same time next week. So, they've got
that's pretty important. And we talked about the guns, but this is another scenario where I think people would be...
How do they protect that?
Fairly up in arms if that information was being leaked out, right?
Yeah, and a lot of these systems are so complex that you end up with about 30 or 40 different sources of data that you need to look at all at the same time, and the volume of that data can no longer be handled by a typical human. By going through it all, there's just such a volume that by the time you figured out basically where the risk was, you'd be sort of 2 weeks later, and you would have been compromised or something.
Yeah, right.
By that
so
stage.
This is where your artificial intelligence, your AI, capability comes into sort of analysing all that data and picking out the most important pieces of it.
Yeah, so being able to correlate that data between all of the different signals we're getting from the different tools and being able to determine that, hey, here is a real threat, and pick that up in almost real time. And so we've just acquired a new company called Jask, which is all around being able to do those types of things. So security analysts that should be, protecting us from, these data breaches like the police and those types of things, they're typically way, way overloaded. It will take them hours, if not days or weeks, to actually detect problems. In fact, the average time undetected for somebody in a system these days is over 100 days, because the volumes are so big, people can't handle it, and they need the ability to use these AI and machine learning capabilities to be able to detect these controls in near real time and then stop the risk,
address them. And that's why we keep hearing about these scenarios, because it's say a member of the public or somebody who's compromised, because organisations own teams and technologies aren't able to actually detect that as quickly as they should be. So you're waiting on somebody to be nice and to tell you in a lot of cases. That's you're
using the public to do the security testing. Whereas that should have been baked into the process. And your tooling should have actually picked that type of thing up. And it's about having those things so that you've got multiple layers of defence in depth, as it were, to identify these things. So it's a key drop ball, I think, really by the police here, not having those sort of processes in place.
Oh well, they might be your next customer. Sounds like they need to be. So now 2019, we're drawing to a close. 2020's about to hit. We're basically 4 weeks from the end of the decade, and we'll be into the next one. What's been on your mind, or that you've been hearing from New Zealand organisations that are that they're thinking about, I guess, from because I always see there's two aspects to technology within businesses. It's how do you minimise and mitigate the risks, and then how do you maximise the things that are really going to benefit an organisation. But what are you hearing about maybe on either side? But I guess there's a big part that with Sumo Logic you play on that minimising and mitigating the risk side, isn't there?
Yeah, it's kind of both sides. So what we're now starting to see is, in the US, sort of about 18 months, 2 years ago, they were getting some really rapid adoption of some new technologies. So there's this technology called Kubernetes, which is just a way to actually deliver software outcomes faster and more reliably at scale. We're now starting to see that type of thing being adopted very quickly in New Zealand organisations. So I mostly work with organisations that are, trying to be disruptors in the industry, the thought leaders, companies that are, like Xero and others that are going out to a global market and innovating. And as they start having to deal with the at-scale issues of business, they're finding that the complexity of their systems is now reaching a sort of a tipping point, and the old ways of figuring out how do I troubleshoot that, how do I keep it reliable, aren't working anymore. So we're working with those types of companies. So we're now starting to see organisations like the largest of New Zealand's sort of government organisations taking their business out of data centres, in the process of shutting down their on-premise data centres and moving to public cloud providers like Amazon, like Microsoft's Azure, like Google's GCP, and they're placing bets in all of those sort of different providers.
Yeah, it seems quite commonly people aren't just, or organisations aren't just choosing one. They tend, there's a lot of use of using multiple cloud providers.
Yeah, correct. So Google sometimes being used for the likes of analytics and AI type tooling. They seem to have some really good sort of foundations in that space, but people that are doing kind of more Java-based sort of application development tend towards the Amazon sort of players. But New Zealand's got a lot of business in the Microsoft space, and we're seeing a lot of those independent software vendors that have started off in the Microsoft space are now moving their applications out into Azure. And we're seeing the public sector companies doing the same things. A lot of things change when you actually move things out to the cloud. You've got to have in place basically all of the checks and balances to make sure that when you push stuff out to the cloud, you've got all of the right security controls and all in place.
That stuff's not easy, is it? It's difficult. And it's time consuming. Yeah,
and if you get it wrong, you end up sort of being in the news like the police did. You've got to get it right. And some of the agencies that I'm seeing are taking a very measured and structured approach to how they're doing that, establishing loading zones and learning how this stuff works. Before they actually put live sort of workloads and all out there, so that they're not putting the reputation of their organisation at risk.
I think we have to. We have to move at pace in a lot of situations, but there also need to be the structures so you can move at pace without putting everything at risk.
So if we go back about a year ago, there was maybe 2 companies that were doing this Kubernetes technology out in public cloud.
Yep, off scale.
If I look today, there's maybe 200 now of maybe the 800 software vendors that are taking software as a service out to the global market. So that's almost a 25% sort of increase over a 1 year period. It's been remarkable how quickly that's happened, and the same sort of trends have been seen in the US about that 18 months sort of 2 years ago. So we're just on the cusp of that learning at the moment.
Yep.
The other trend we're seeing is software developers are being very, very dominant in how businesses are being disrupted. And it's the software vendors that are able to automate the entire end-to-end process are the ones that are really succeeding. So, automating your security testing, automating your build, your configuration, automating your monitoring and observability all the way through. So that automation is the key for organisations of any size, whether they're a disruptive software vendor delivering SaaS services to a global economy, or a New Zealand sort of public sector e-government sort of organisation. They need to be leveraging automation.
Yeah, and I think that's a lesson for any business or organisation of any size, right? You don't want to be doing things manually that you can automate unless you're getting some huge benefit of it being done by people. But often these things are either mundane, there's mundane workloads, or things that actually just can't be done, like what you talked about with most security breaches not being found quickly, or the average time to find things being that 100 days.
Yeah.
It's amazing that's still the case. So I think there's all sorts of reasons why we've got to up our game and be working out and getting going with this the varying types of automation.
We're certainly seeing organisations that are when they go out to a global market, the level of compliance they've got to have to regulatory sort of environments and the likes does upshift quite a lot. So if you're a organisation trying to break into a global market, come and have a chat to Sumo Logic. We'd love to talk to you about how we can actually help you get there in a very cost-effective way.
Nice. Oh, it's awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. So
thanks, Paul.
Thank you for joining the show, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening in, and a special thank you to the partners of the show that make it possible. We do have some interesting episodes coming up over the next couple of weeks. Oh, the new MacBook Pro's just jumped into the discussion. You might not have heard that, but it heard something I was saying and decided it wanted to jump in and respond by voice. I do have here the new MacBook Pro 16-inch, which is a phenomenal machine from what I've seen of it so far. 8 cores, stunning big screen and whatnot, and a few things on the keyboard front that people didn't like that they've addressed. So I'll be trying that out over the next little while, and I'll report back on that. But we don't have time for it this week. But as I was saying, thank you to our show partners: Sumo Logic, Vodafone, Spark, Vocus, HP, and Samsung. And look out for our shows coming up between now and Christmas. We've got I'll be in a bit of time in Singapore, China, probably at least a couple of other countries in the mix as well. So we've got some special episodes coming. All right, thanks everyone. We'll catch you next week for the next episode. See ya.
Thanks.